This week on the 411, Obama-Romney round 3, Donald Trump and more. The third presidential debate gave us more of the same, where President Obama annihilated a demure and surprisingly agreeable counterpart in Mitt Romney, who was doing his best to quote-unquote hug the president's overseas policies.
I think Governor Romney maybe hasn't spent enough time looking at how our military works. You mentioned the Navy, for example, and that we have fewer ships than we did in 1916. Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets because the nature of our military's changed. We have these things called aircraft carriers where planes land on them. We have these ships that go underwater, nuclear submarines. And so the question is not a game of battleship where we're counting ships. It's what are our capabilities? And so when I sit down with the Secretary of the Navy and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we determine how are we going to be best able to meet all of our defense needs in a way that also keeps faith with our troops, that also makes sure that our veterans have the kind of support that they need when they come home. And that is not reflected in the kind of budget that you're putting forward because it just doesn't work.
All right.
And we visited the website quite a bit, and it still doesn't work.
Whether he was trying to tack to the center and not resemble his Republican predecessor in George W. Bush, or he was simply way out of his political depth on foreign policy, Mr. Romney appeared a different man than before, while President Obama finished on a high note in the final political debate of his life. Without any discussion on world hunger, melting polar ice caps, and an agreement on drone strikes of all things, the night more resembled two moderate Republicans in a primary debate who had just made a backroom deal to be running mates. In a related story, waging a preemptive strike against the president's expected debate win on Monday, Donald Trump announced to the world that he had a mother of all October surprises he was going to drop on Wednesday and change the game, leaving many on the left holding their breath and some on the right buying victory cigars and chilling champagne.
If Barack Obama opens up and gives his college records and applications, and if he gives his passport applications and records, I will give to a charity of his choice, Inner City Children in Chicago, American Cancer Society, AIDS research, anything he wants, a check immediately for $5 million.
Wow, what a doozy. His Obama shell landed like the droppings of a goose flying at 50 feet. No, make that 25 feet, less force. Expected to be a political catalyst meant to drive people, all the undecideds that is, into former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney's camp, Mr. Trump's big reveal ironically did the opposite, giving men and women of most political stripes a reason to come together and in a collective laugh at and not with the Manhattan mogul who continues to jettison himself further into the oblivion of media irrelevance. What's next? We can only expect that Mr. Trump will now release a sex tape with Kim Kardashian or Hulk Hogan or who knows. Next up, in a move that should surprise absolutely no one, a number of Florida residents have received letters discouraging them to vote. But here's the kicker. Though the letters questioning people's citizenship have gone out to voters in 23 counties, they're landing in mostly Republican-leaning mailboxes. If there was ever time for the good times ooh ah crowd gasp track at the show, it would be now. This is getting interesting. Staying on the political front, in a move that surprised few, retired General and former George W. Bush Secretary of State Colin Powell announced in front of a national television audience that he was again backing President Obama. Of course he did. How could he not? He's a brother, right? And brothers got to stick together. Wrong. Tell that to Michael Steele, Larry Elder, Stacey Dash, and Ken Blackwell, to name a few. Now, evidently, Mr. Powell threw his support behind President Obama because of his foreign policy bona fides and a lack of a coherent Romney policy, or to bring the show full circle, the Obama-light foreign policy Mr. Romney espoused on Monday night. Lastly, music is more sexually arousing than touch, says music service provider Spotify. The study suggested that more were turned on by listening to Dirty Dancing than actually doing it. I'm a skeptic. Anyway, that's all this week. Thanks for joining me, Facebook and Twitters. And remember, early voting is happening in most states. Get out there and vote. I'm Matt Simon. This is Loop21.com. I'm going to go throw on an 8-track of the dulcet tones of Bill Medley and Jennifer Warnes, and smoke a cigarette and get some Hennessy.